Yeah, here we go. Yes, everything works right off the bat. Is my audio coming through? You guys know that sometimes I'm just unsure. How am I sounding to get things started? I'm gonna wait on you guys' response, but man, if you're here early, we got an excited one for this time around. We're gonna be talking about the soybean oil controversy. If you aren't sure what that is, I'm gonna get into it here in just a sec. What's up? What's up, guys? How's the mic? How's the mic? Am I sounding all right? Help me out. What's up? What's up? What's up? Okay, so let me expand you guys so I can see the chat here. The soybean oil controversy, in short, is an interesting topic because sounds good, awesome. Before the 1940s, soybean oil didn't really exist, right? Seed oils didn't really exist. That's when we started consuming them in that span of time, really with the 1940s is when we start introducing them because we were able to basically produce them at a more efficient rate, and they were becoming this less industrial oil and becoming this more refined edible oil essentially. And you guys may have seen my last video, and it was on fast food, and I had an excerpt there about it. And I brought up this paper. And this paper had 4 claims. We're going to talk about all 4 claims. So if you remember from my last video, I said one day maybe we'll make a live stream on the all 4 claims that are defending the soybean oil. Yes, you heard me right. Soybean oil is being defended. It's a very interesting topic. Like I said, 1940s, they were introduced. Up until recently, we were all kind of locked arms and agreeing, saying, hey, soybean oil, seed oils, really, we're going to interchange them a lot throughout this stream. They are not really good for us. Like, they don't need to have a second look. We know what it takes for them to be made, and we know that they are inherently just bad, right? That's what we've been saying. But as of recent times, unbeknownst to me, or shockingly to me, I should say, I didn't expect people to push back on this. But of course, if there is a majority take on something, we are going to have a contrarian take, a minority, a small population of people on the other side saying the opposite. And it's finally come across my desk. People are saying the opposite, and they are defending soybean oil and defending seed oils. You may have seen certain people on Vince Cerf's internet defending soybean oil. So what I want to get into and what I want to talk about is this legit? Was my camera my camera was on that small thing the whole time? I meant to be talking here. Hi, is this legit? We're going to dive into the research. The reason this is going to be such an exciting stream is because in this stream you're going to learn about the mechanism of cardiovascular disease. You're going to learn about the mechanism of LDL. We're going to get really into the weeds. We're going to talk about the details. We're going to talk about the things that you and your doctor don't have time to discuss when you get your lipid profile, when you get your blood work done, and you really want to ask these questions about LDL and cholesterol. Like, all of this stuff is going to make so much sense at the end of this. I'm really confident that this slice of pie from the internet is going to be something for you to return to when it's all said and done, because this is going to be valuable. I'm going to teach you how I was taught, LDL, cholesterol, all that fun stuff. And really, you got to set the foundation. It's important. We got to set the foundation. That's why we're going to be talking a lot about LDL. And this conversation really in this stream is going to really revolve around somewhat of the pathology of cardiovascular disease, right? And we are we're going to talk about soybean oil, but let's just get right into it. Hello, Pam. Thanks for joining. What's up, Sarah? What's up? 010101B? Got to work on that username. Thanks for being here. Could I break down which fatty acids are inflammatory? Possibly. I'll get into that. All right, let's get into the fun stuff. I already showed you guys one of the slides, but that's actually not the first thing we're going to talk about. It took so long to set these slides up. But for people that are going to rewatch this, let's go ahead and start with that value. Thank you guys for being here live. Let's chit chat about what we got on the docket. So this is the truth here. We have a majority that are saying, hey, soybean oil, seed oils, right? We're going to interchange them throughout the stream. Those are not good for us. We talk about animal fats instead, and we talk about olive oil, coconut oil, butter. We talk about those things. Those are the fats that we eat, and we say avoid seed oils, right? That is a popular thing that you hear across the internet. Now, what's interesting, like I said, there's an opposing view. But the truth is often found somewhere in the middle. So if there's an extreme side over here and there's an extreme side over here, typically, what do we associate extreme with, right? Extremist, right? That has a negative connotation. That probably means that neither of these sides are 100% right. And how I often like to think is that the truth, if you're really curious and seeking it, is going to be found somewhere in the middle. Maybe a little bit more to this side, maybe a little bit more to this side. But either way, I'm not going to sit here and say that soybean oil and seed oils are 100% all bad, not great news. But I'm not going to say the other take either. I think there's just more nuance. And you guys know that's my favorite word because there's always more to talk about. Let's get right on into it. So this is the study that I brought up. Soybean oil lowers circulating cholesterol levels and coronary heart disease risk and has no effect on markers of inflammation and oxidation. This study itself is the most cited study on no lab coat required to this day. There's something about seed oils that just sparks interest because we're not talking about meat. We're not talking about, I don't know, artificial sweeteners. We're not talking about, I don't know, caffeine, right? It's such a very specific thing with seed oils and soybean oils being that they are relatively new, right? This is a new problem. Again, we did not start really consuming these until the 1940s. They were forced into margarine compositions, formulations because we were on a shortage. We were in World War II. So we needed to make sure that we were eating fat, but also rationing it out. So we didn't really even have these on the scene. What's up? What's up? Oh, I got you, B. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up, Mark? Italy. Wow. How cool is that? What's up, Ray? Glad you're here. What's up? What's up? What's up? Let's keep this thing rolling. Okay, so if we look at this here, and I'm going to have notes. You guys are going to see these little dashes and stuff. Let's see if the whiteboard on this thing is going to work. Oh, I have to add it. Oh, boy. Here we go. Streaming stuff. All right, here we go. Check this out. So I can add this here. Look at how many claims are here. Lower circulating cholesterol. I don't know what this is. Yep, there we go. 1, coronary heart disease risk. 2, no effect on markers of inflammation. 3, no effect on oxidation. Now, this is quite the positive report card for soybean oil. Who would make such a thing? Well, we're going to get to that. We are certainly going to get to that. But this is very interesting. So why soybean oil? Why soybean oil? Well, soybean oil is the oil. It's the chairman of seed oils, right? It is king seed oil. So seed oil is really an umbrella term. We're referring to oils that are typically heavily processed and they come from plant sources. A lot of times, majority of the time, we're actually squeezing the actual seed of the plant and extracting oil, right? I just noted that in 2 steps, but in reality, to extract seed oil, we need up to 7 steps, somewhere between 5 and 7 steps. So to have these oils exist, it takes a whole lot of processing. There are 4 claims in this study. We're going to address them all. This stream is going to be part 1 and part 2. It's going to cover the first 2 claims, and then we're going to have another stream sometime in the future that addresses part 3 and 4, which are going to be claim 3 and claim 4. This is going to be about claim number 1, part 1. Let's get right on into it. Soybean oil lowers coronary heart disease risk. Oh boy. Oh boy. So we have to set the foundation. Again, we're going to talk a lot about LDL. We're going to talk a lot about cardiovascular disease. And we're going to talk about what the literal mechanisms behind these things are, because we cannot talk about whether soybean oil and seed oils are good or not without understanding the entire big picture. We just can't. So we do have to spend a little bit of time being highly detailed here. I'm trying to make my chat a little bigger. Can I pop this out? Timestamps. I want to see you guys. How do I do this? Streaming is for people who are technologically advanced. I just read. Okay, fine. It doesn't want me. I'll have to look over here. Or no, I could do this. Yeah, that's somewhat better. I'll get better at this someday. What's up, Tay Cat? Take Cat, I suspect it will end as the dose makes the poison, as with pretty much anything related to food. Yeah, that is a very common take when it comes to talking about food, but I will have to tell you, surprisingly, nah, this is a very intricate, dynamic relationship between seed oils and the lipoproteins in our body. So, what am I talking about? What are we saying? Let's get right into it. And let's talk about what we have here. That's an interesting prediction, but what is really going on here? So, in order to have a relevant conversation revolving around coronary heart disease, cardiovascular disease, we have to understand what is cholesterol in the first place, right? This is a huge buzzword. You hear cholesterol, your ears perk up. You see cholesterol is in animal products. You're like, oh my gosh. You hear your body makes cholesterol. You're like, oh my gosh. Cholesterol is a buzzword. You can write so many topics on this. It's a health buzzword. So, what are the three fats? Cholesterol is a fat. That's what we have to understand. And it's actually one of the three. So, there's three major fats. Triglycerides is the fat, right? When you hear fat, right? And we're going to use fat and we're going to use lipid kind of interchangeably here. When you hear the word triglycerides, or when you hear the word fat, I should say, spoken by just about any communicator who's talking about health, any doctor, any researcher, they are likely more times than not referring to triglycerides. Triglycerides are the literal form of fat that we can touch and see, right? We're talking about the molecular structure here. So a triglyceride is a molecular structure, but triglycerides are literally the fat on our body, the fat in our butter, the fat that makes up olive oil. When you hear fat, the fat that you can reach out and touch, the fat that you can grab and see, right? Those are triglycerides. That's how fat stacks up in our real life. We also have phospholipids. Phospholipids we're going to get to later, but do know that they exist. And they're going to actually come into play for a different part of these streams that are to come. So we have triglycerides, phospholipids, and then we have cholesterol. Cholesterol is just a form of fat in the same way that phospholipids are, in the same way that triglycerides are. The only reason we can differentiate between these three is because of their molecular structure. So we're a little microscopic here, but it's just like looking at ants, right? And I'll often have my notes here so you guys can follow along. I have so many things in the description as well, but we'll get into that. But I often have my notes here to remind me, but they can also work to bring pictures into you guys' heads. So we know different types of ants exist, right? We have, I don't know, fire ants. We have carpenter ants. We have wooden ants. I was just Googling ants yesterday when I was preparing for the stream. I'm like, what type of ants? I don't know ants like that. If you guys know different types of ants, throw them in the chat. But we can tell the difference in ants by just looking at them, right? These, well, not microscopic, but these very small ants, we could tell that they are different, but they are all still ants. We just classify them different. Well, it's the same thing with fat and lipids. They're all still fat. They're all still lipids and relevant. We just classify them differently based on how they look, right? Their molecular structure. So fascinating. So with cholesterol, feral ants are the worst. Okay, Sarah knows about ants. What do? Do those bite? I just know that you have to avoid like the red ants. I think at least, I don't know if that's a myth or not. Feral ants are the soybean oil of ants. Oh boy, carpet ants give me anxiety. Okay, all right, we know our ants here. Oh, they infect. Oh, okay, yeah. What are the big flying ants? We get those around here. The big black, and they have wings. When I was a kid, I was like, okay, these ants basically evolved. The ants that are sizable with wings, that's ridiculous. Three functions of cholesterol. So what are the three functions? Cholesterol is in charge of three things, and they are just so vital to our health. They're vital to human functioning. The first thing that they are in charge of is ensuring that we have bile in our gallbladder, ensuring that we have bile acids that make up bile in our gallbladder. So they are a precursor, if you will. They come first to make bile. Bile is used to emulsify or mix or help us digest fat, because we know fat and water don't mix. And that's going to be a common theme when we talk about fat all the time. We want to understand fat isn't just loose in the body, right? It's not just existing in the body. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's the first function of cholesterol is that it helps it makes bile, and bile helps us digest fat. So it's interesting. We use a fat to help us digest fat. A very interesting thing that's going on there. The second thing is that cholesterol helps to make certain hormones with a sterile backbone. So we have these estrogen hormones, right? We have the testosterone, right? Some hormones come from, I think I said sterile backbone. I mean steroid backbone, right? So cholesterol helps us make steroid hormones, testosterone and estrogen, right? You can even hear it in that wordplay there. And interestingly, the last thing that I just love this function about cholesterol, it embeds itself in our cell membranes and helps to make them more rigid. It affects the way our cells communicate. It helps to add structure to the cell membrane. The cell membrane is just the wall, the outer coat of the cell. Just like any other building has walls, our cells do as well. What's interesting about cholesterol is that just how you are in a building and you may see pillars holding up the building, essentially that's what cholesterol is doing in our cells, for our cells. So it's a necessary component. As we could imagine, cholesterol helps to firm a lot of things, a lot of our cells. It helps to firm them up, right? So that's necessary. That's necessary. And if we keep rolling here, you guys already seen this one, but this is the first thing. So I have everything in the description. You can follow along. The first site is this study, and this is the study that I've been referencing, that I've been talking about. Hey, this study makes the 4 claims, all that good stuff. I kid you not, this study has made, that's why I said, I named the title this, Addressing the Soybean Oil Once and for All, because we've been talking so much about fat, but honestly, I think this is going to be one of the most insightful conversations you've ever had about soybean oil, fat, and all that fun stuff. So one of the things that came out of this study was a very apparent mechanism that the author was going for. And we can read it here. It should, however, be noted that LDL cholesterol, we know that as LDL-C, is the primary target for cardiovascular disease prevention. It may not seem like it, but this is a fairly loaded statement. It may not seem like it, but this is a fairly loaded statement. Why so? We're going to get into that. But this is very important to note because we're going to talk about soybean oil here. But we're really going to be spending a lot of time talking about LDL because it's going to pay off dividends once we get to the second stream and later in this stream. A lot of us are going to have some huge aha moments. I'm super excited for you guys to get these understandings under your belt. So we have to understand what the author, and really what does this mean to say that LDL cholesterol is the primary target for CVD prevention? Well, we know that. When we go to the doctor, we get our lipid profile. We can say that our cholesterol is high. We can say that our cholesterol is low, right? We know that that is the LDL. We hear that all the time. That's our bad cholesterol. We're going to talk about that. And then we know that HDL is our good cholesterol, right? And we just kind of throw those blanket statements over those two molecules or particles in the body, if you will. And there's so much more to consider than just if they're good or bad. So much so to the point to where your risk depends on it. So when we say increased risk, lower risk of developing cardiovascular disease, we actually have to talk about LDL and its distinctions. So LDL, I have lipid delivery lady here. That's what LDL stands for. In my head, LDL stands for low density lipoprotein, but his name does not matter as much as its function. It doesn't matter just almost at all. I'm ready for the aha moment. I see you, Ann. That's it. Hope I'm saying your name right. Yeah, so lipid delivery lady just helps me to remember what LDL is. So lipid, we know that word is interchangeable with fat for the most part. So when we eat fat, we know that fat and water don't mix. Right, so if you look at the bottom right here, I have this glass, and I poured some. I think I had, what oil did I have? I want to say olive oil at the time, but basically I poured it in a glass of water, and it floats to the top because we understand that fat and water do not mix. So if we're eating, right, if we're eating fat, it has to get around, but it can't just be in the body. Right? Just loose. we need a vehicle for it. And that's when LDL comes in. LDL literally encapsulates, it literally encases, right? It encloses around fats that we eat and helps to get them around the body. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that as well, because we know fat and water don't mix. So it's like if we had a mail carrier with a bag of mail and there's no envelopes in her bag, just a bunch of loose mail, and her duty is to get that mail out to the different addresses. But there's no envelopes, there's no addresses, there's no nothing that really differentiates the mail. It's just a big old pile of paper in her bag, right? That does not sound like that's a good thing. So we invented envelopes to help the system be a little bit more orderly and neat. That's what lipoproteins are in the body. They're kind of like envelopes. They help keep the transportation of fat orderly and neat. Because if we didn't have them, I'm saying we probably eat a meal of fat. If we didn't have lipoproteins, I'd say give us about 3.5 minutes. I'm claiming you're dead. I'll say 3.5 minutes living max without lipoproteins. That's my estimation. But we need them. They're vital, right? They are vital. So this is the interesting part. We talked about the 3 types of fat, and funny enough, they're all involved in the LDL particle. So in the actual LDL particle, there are passengers, right? These are the vehicles. Triglycerides are in there. We talked about those. Triglycerides are in that LDL particle. Cholesterol is also inside that LDL particle, getting transferred around the body in the blood. And phospholipids are what make up the membrane of the particle, what make up the outer layer of the particle. This right here is a rough drawing of a lipoprotein. Funny enough, I commissioned this out for somebody to make for me. And yeah, I was going back and forth. How much does this cost? I think this cost me like $120 to get this made. I could pull a picture off Google, but the pictures on Google, sometimes they're a little bit too complex. So I had somebody make this for me, and I'm pleased with how it came out for the most part. I'm pretty pleased how this came out. And yeah, no, it was interesting. I couldn't help but think that I was getting scammed. I'm like, are they just editing like a Google photo, or did they make this from scratch? Like I couldn't figure it out, because I would tell them to make an edit, and it looked like they would just like overlay another picture. Like, okay, I'm sorry, I have to make this whole thing now. So if you guys look really close, if you look really close, you can see like this little let's see here. If you look really close, you can see this little part right here. Trying to pull out my whiteboard, but you can see this little part right here. I told them that I want this to be like, all one piece thick or whatever. And it just looks like they just added another little like cholesterol piece on top of it. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but it looks like, why are these like 2 pieces? Like, you see that? Like, every request that I made, it was just like, are they just editing a Google image, or is this from scratch? So I wrestled with that. Okay, let's fix that. Okay, let's make this smaller. Boom. All right, so back to business. It's gonna take me a long time to pull my whiteboard pencil out for a lot of the stuff I want to highlight, because I forgot to put it on all of my slides for the stream. Making slides takes so long. Somebody do it for me, please. I'll pay somebody a hefty amount of high fives to please make my slides for me. Okay, so LDL, this is such a intuitive particle. If we want fat to get around, we think of things as circles usually in the body, right? Cells, we think of a round shape. Same thing with LDL particles. Now, let's talk about the scale here. This thing is ridiculously tiny, like super tiny. And we're actually going to get into the scale a little bit more, but we can put it this way. If a random human cell is the size of an Olympic stadium, right, where they were running track and field in Paris, then an LDL particle will be about the size of 1 human in that stadium. So this is extremely tiny. This is really little microscopic stuff. But in this LDL particle, we can actually see what's going on here. We can actually see what's going on here. Okay, that's a nice thick pen. Let's do that. I had to change the size on the pen. How cool is that? Stuff working. So what's going on here? What are we looking at? So this is a protein. We're not going to spend time looking at proteins. They're mostly, unless you want to talk about the actual mechanics behind how fat is delivered, how they influence, liver receptors, all this other stuff. We don't really have to talk about proteins. So we won't worry about this at all. But what's interesting about the LDL particle, and this is important, ears got to perk up here. Each fat that we talked about is present here. So these yellow tails with blue heads, those are phospholipids. These orange pieces embedded in the cell, these are known as free cholesterol. And then inside the LDL particle, we have esterified cholesterol, which is represented by those yellow heads in there. And then we have a whole bunch of pink heads. Those are triglycerides, right? If you look really closely, they have 3 tails in them. So this is what a triglyceride looks like, essentially. It kind of looks like this. And then it has a tail, another tail, triglyceride, 3 tri. So those are the components of an LDL. Funny enough, this lipoprotein, right? We know this as a lipoprotein. This lipoprotein, this motorcade, this vehicle has all 3 fats involved. Now, think about it this way. When we see the presidential motorcade and we see those long limos and we see that there is, the American flags on them and all that fun stuff, we go like, oh, hey, look, it's the president, right? We point out that there is we point out the passenger in the vehicle. We never really say, oh, look, it's the presidential motorcade, right? We say, oh, look, it's the president. The same thing is taking place with cholesterol and the lipoprotein. We aren't saying, oh, look, it's a lipoprotein. We say, oh, hey, look, it's cholesterol. We point out the passenger, but please do know, and this is an important distinction, carry this with you for the rest of your life. Please do know cholesterol and LDL are far from the same thing. We are talking about 2 totally different things. LDL is the vehicle cholesterol rides in, right? So cholesterol is the passenger, LDL is the vehicle. It gets really confusing, but again, these are the things that your doctor just doesn't have time to sit down and talk with you with. So you do need health communicators like myself that spend a little bit more time with this stuff that can break it down for you. They probably use AI to generate the image. You know what? I'm not mad at that. If Casey, if I was making art or whatever, if I was making like commission pieces for people, I wouldn't bother not using AI. I would use AI, right? If it makes my workflow more efficient. But also I'll say this. Is anybody else like this? You will pay somebody quick, right? There's a lot of people that are like do it yourself. My friend Nick, I was just with him yesterday. He works on cars and stuff. And anytime our car would go down, he's like, do it yourself. And I was like, no, I'm going to pay for it, right? Because there's just some things you're inclined to do for yourself, but I'm somebody who was like, I will pay for an expert to do this well before I will attempt it, right? I can fix like very minor things on a car, but listen, why would I spend the time researching, learning how to fix this when there's somebody out there with the knowledge already that can do this if I just give them a little money? And that's how my brain works, right? I will pay somebody quick before I worry about it myself. All right, let's keep things rolling here. I'm sipping on LMNT. That's my last can of their sparkling. I'm going to miss that stuff. I'm going to have to get some more re-up. But it's essentially the same thing as the powder stuff that I always talk about. But it's in a can, and that makes it cool because it sparkles and it's social, right? If you're a social kind of person, right? Right. This is about as social as I was gonna say it's about as social as my day is gonna get, but I forgot I do have plans later. I'm gonna go to a pop-up in Chicago. I'm gonna go to a pop-up. Apparently that's a big thing in Chicago. They do like pop-ups and stuff. And I've been to like one and I want to do it more. They have like clothes that they sell and it's different like merchants. I don't know. It's a scene that I'm interested in getting into. So we're gonna go do that. Okay, I just went on about 6 tangents. Are you guys still with me? I wouldn't be mad either. I'm just saying that the reason that there are these little weird errors is likely because of AI. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting, Casey. I am not a fan of. Do I want to talk about AI right now? No, I don't. Let's stay focused. Let's stay focused. But before we get to that, Mark, yo, I appreciate that. Yo, I appreciate the donation, man. Yo, first donation. Many thanks. Many thanks. No words that come with it. Just a beautiful GIF. The GIF says, What does this thing say? Number one. It says number one. You guys have no idea how my stream is set up for me to actually look at this. Okay, so if you guys have never heard of how cardiovascular disease develops, you are in luck. You are in the right spot at the right time. This is stuff that you can crash course, right? Cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, atherosclerosis, all of these words, especially in the medical world of academia, right? These are interchangeable terms, right? So a lot of this stuff is semantics, but when I'm going to speak and the semantics makes the difference, I'm going to make that known. So this is so good. The crash course for cardiovascular disease. We have to understand what's going on here. So ears perk up. Let's get the value. How is cardiovascular disease developed? First things first, we talked about LDL. Now, we were talking that entire time about regular LDL. This is an important distinction. I hope your ears are perked up. There are two versions of LDL that we need to be aware of in terms of modified or not, right? So there is regular LDL and then there is modified LDL. Keep that in mind. There's regular LDL and then there's modified LDL. I know a lot of people are like, what does this have to do with soybean oil? We have to learn about LDL and cardiovascular disease for this stuff to pay off at the end. Trust me, it's all going to come and it's going to click and you're going to be like, oh. But the thing is, we don't have time in short videos and in doctor's appointments to explain this stuff. So LDL is that there's a regular version and then there's a modified version. Now, this modified version is so important, it's so influential on our metabolism that the entire body has to respond. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about modified LDL in a different stream, but just understand that there are those two differences, right? We're going to talk about that in part 3 and 4. But there are those two differences. So that modified LDL, it serves as a trigger point. Here's a word here. It serves as a seminal point, or a better word, pivotal point. That is to say that we are going this way. As soon as we're modified, we are now going this way, right? It serves as a turn in direction of how the body has to respond. What happens when a LDL particle becomes modified? Well, the immune system activates, and this is when things get a little nasty. When the immune system activates, a macrophage is summoned. What is a macrophage, Johnny? This is a macrophage. Pac-Man, right? Right? There's an arcade in the city, and I don't know when this was, but a couple years ago, maybe a year ago, me and some friends were out, and they had this. Well, no, it wasn't like an arcade. It was like a restaurant, and they had this like on the side near the back. And I went to go play this away from my friends for like 15 minutes straight. I was zoned out because I had never played Pac-Man on an actual like arcade machine, and I was moving a little joystick, and I was locked in. And I did all right. I think if I dedicated my life to Pac-Man, I'd probably be that instead of a YouTuber, a professional Pac-Man player. I hope they have those. They probably aren't paid well. Anyways, this is what a macrophage is. As you can see, Pac-Man, when he goes and he gets that invincible perk, right? Those things in the corners, whatever that thing is, and he goes after the ghost to eat them, that is what a macrophage is doing in the body all of the time. Anything that threatens to, I don't know, propagate any bacteria that we don't need in the body, anything that is threatening human health, anything specifically that can be dismantled by a macrophage, the body goes ahead and sends one out. So it sends out this Pac-Man looking item, or this Pac-Man acting item. It chomps up the thing that is threatening us, and it spits it out in benign byproducts, right? It literally dismantles organisms, right? And it's the coolest thing ever, right? So that is what a macrophage is, and that is all fine and dandy, and it works really well. What's very interesting is that macrophages actually also are triggered when LDL particles become modified. So LDL lipoproteins, or lipoproteins, I should say, when they become modified, they are a threat to our health, and the immune system responds. So if we're following along, we're now at number 4. Johnny, you're repeating 3 and 4. Nah, I'm not. This is what's going on here. Check this out. This is what's going on here. So when we have that macrophage come and chomp, chomp, chomp up the modified LDL, we no longer have a macrophage to worry about. We now have a foam cell. So if you guys are keen into the development of cardiovascular disease, or if you've ever paid attention to some of the more, I don't know, micro words that are thrown in there, if you've ever heard anybody just lecture or talk about cardiovascular disease at all, you may have heard the word foam cell thrown in there. So, foam cell is actually a derivative of a dysfunctional macrophage. Okay, we are so molecular, Johnny. I'm a little lost here. Let's set this up. LDL, modified LDL, is actually a dysfunctional character in human metabolism. Because of that, we have to get rid of it. So the body decides to send a macrophage after it. This macrophage acts like Pac-Man. It comes to eat that modified LDL, but that modified LDL is so dysfunctional that the actual Pac-Man character, the macrophage itself, also becomes dysfunctional. I'll give you this example. I have an old washer. When I overstuff that washer, I put too many clothes in there, that thing just spins out as if it's an earthquake. And I don't live in California. It shouldn't feel like there's an earthquake going on. I have to take clothes out for that thing to spin, right? So when I overpack it, it becomes dysfunctional, right? When I overpack it, it becomes dysfunctional. And the same thing happens with macrophages. They chomp, chomp, chomp all these modified LDLs. It becomes overpacked, it becomes swollen, and it's this fat-laden heavy glob that we can no longer call a macrophage. We now have to call it a foam cell. Mark that, Naomi. Now, because this is a foam cell, this is a dysfunctional item in the body, there isn't just that, I should say the immune system isn't just reacting by just that foam cell, right? So there's endothelial damage as well. There's endothelial damage as well. So you remember how I talked about how modified LDL, when we modify our LDL, we take a turn, we pivot, that's a seminal point. Well, it's because it causes a cascade of different things to take place. Three things that are important. Number one, endothelial damage. So we're looking at number 5 here, endothelial damage. So we're talking about the literal walls of our blood vessels. We're talking about the stuff that immediately surrounds our blood, encapsulates our blood. The second thing is we talk about platelet activation. We know platelets as these really highly intelligent bonding cells that stick together to help blood clot when we are bleeding. But check it out. We're not bleeding here, at least not externally. We're bleeding internally because our endothelial damage. So we're kind of are summoning these platelets somewhat unnecessarily because we don't really need them here, but we still summon them and it causes a sticky, right? This adds a sticky ingredient to the mix. So now we're starting to understand like how this plaque is formed. So now we have a compromised endothelial, right? And we have this sticky platelet stuff. And the last thing that happens is that macrophage comes over, it chomps on that LDL, it takes in another LDL and another LDL and so many LDLs until it becomes dysfunctional. It's swollen, it's a fat cell, or not a fat cell, it's swollen, it's a foam cell. And what's interesting about this foam cell is that it can't be dismantled efficiently. Because of that, it just kind of, we're looking at number 6 now, it just kind of aggregates and dumps off a whole lot of fat at the site of our endothelial. This takes place over time. The LDL keeps coming over. It's modified. Macrophage keep coming over. It turns into a foam cell. So much fat, so much cholesterol. It just tends to pile up and pile up and pile up near that compromised blood lining. And now we have plaque that is starting to form. So cardiovascular disease does not take place in the span of 48 hours, right? I can eat a plate full of carbs and spaghetti, stimulate the production of cholesterol. I can eat even external cholesterol. I can have all that stuff in me, and I still probably won't have a bump in risk or plaque development. This stuff takes time. This stuff takes place over a large periods of time. All right. So Roman asks, "What's up, Roman? Did anyone else never get a notification when he goes live?" And you know what? So YouTube is doing this thing. If you guys hit the bell, you actually have to hit another setting. So you hit the bell, but then you have to hit all notifications. And I believe that's what makes the difference. Because I think YouTube sends you notifications sparingly because it doesn't want to bother you. And I'm kind of like that too. I'm like, I'm live. I whisper it, I don't yell it. I'm live. But I think you can actually opt to hear everything that happens. Like if I post a community post, all that stuff, you can go to I think you can go to my channel right now, maybe somewhere, and you can hit all notifications. It gives you two options. I think that's the difference maker. If not, then YouTube, come on, man. Come on, YouTube. All right, I was out of the chat for a little bit because I was in the zone explaining that stuff. Are we following along? Does that make sense? Are there any questions before we move on here? There is no question that's too big or too small. Oh, yeah. What's up? What's up, Flunky? Yeah, I'm glad you're here. What's up? What's up? Sunflower oil, maybe it's different. I eat sunflower butter. I eat sunflower butter daily though, and that's okay. You know, I'm not familiar with sunflower butter. I imagine that that is a hydrogenated version of sunflower oil, maybe. So it's is it solid at room temperature? If so, then uh, that would be a little bit different than seed oil. Then yeah, you'd be on the right track. William is on track. He says saturated fats are best, and we're gonna talk about that too. What's up, Jacob? Glad you're here. Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. Blackjack. If you guys read his chat, that explains it too. You guys can hit the bell if I schedule a live. The thing is, I schedule lives like a couple hours. Like I finally finished the slides or whatever. I'm like, all right, here we go. We're about to go live, and I schedule it just then, or sometimes a day ahead. Sometimes, yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's keep this train rolling. I really hope this is making sense. On the spider, they throw a bit of. I really hope this is making sense for you guys. Okay, so what else do I have here? So we think of what do we think of when we think of cardiovascular disease? We think of that plaque. We think of those fatty deposits. And now with the mechanism and pathology that I just explained, now we know where that stuff is coming from. And really, we got to think about it like this. Because if we look at the crime scene of a plaque formation, right? There's a lot of fat-centric items. You know, triglycerides are there, cholesterol is there, right? We toss the word lipid around. Our mind is just set on fat. So you can see how that easily translated to getting rid of fat, which, eventually led to stop eating saturated fat. But now we're starting to unlearn and dive into a little bit more of the nuance and how that missed the mark a little bit. But the whole thing that I want us to realize here is that when we think about that plaque, we think about those fatty deposits, what's going on there is debris, right? It's just debris from that lipoprotein, that vehicle that we talked about. And just like any high-speed car accident, God forbid, I hope we're all driving safe today. But just like any high-speed car accident, there's going to be debris all over the road. So if we're talking about this foam cell aggregation, this fat-laden aggregation, this lipid, this cholesterol, all this stuff, and it's just kind of jamming into that compromised blood lining, there's going to be fat debris everywhere. So of course cholesterol is on the scene because cholesterol was a passenger in that vehicle. But does that mean cholesterol caused the crash? That's the million-dollar question. And we're going to go over it today, but I would argue early that the answer is no. The answer is no. Mark that, Naomi. Let's keep things rolling. I told you guys. So what does this have to do with soybean oil? I told you guys, we gotta talk about the bottom line here. And it's gonna all click, but we gotta talk about the bottom line here. High deposits. LDL 101. Boom, what do we have? Where am I? Where are my slides? Oh boy. Oh boy. Here we go. Okay, cool. So, all right, what else did I have here? What's the problem, LDL? Oh, this is the question of the year. This is what I want you guys to think of. So I erased everything else. What's the problem? Maybe we won't answer this yet. But if we look at these steps and we talk about how this turns into a foam cell, all this fun stuff. If we look at these steps and we see that LDL exists as it may be, but then we see that modified LDL, without that, this entire cascade of steps can't even take place. So the question to ask is, what's the problem, LDL or modified LDL? It's something to give a little bit of thought to. It's something to give a little bit of thought to. But let's continue here. What else did I have on here? Oh, yeah, I had this too. I had this example. So when think of it this way, what matters more between regular old benign LDL or modified LDL that causes this cascade of problems? I think the question to ask would be, when do you call emergency services? On your regular commute to work when there is a safe drive and it's uneventful? Or do you call emergency services when you get into a very rough car crash with someone else? Right? That is really the difference we're talking about here. We're talking about something that's benign and something that's harshly harmful. We're talking about two separate things between LDL and modified LDL. Mark that, Naomi. So that really is the key that I want us to walk away here with, is that we don't distinguish and differentiate oftentimes between these two. Unless, honestly, you're in some of the medical research, and even that stuff that I've been reading for the last, I don't even know, couple years, even the stuff that I'm coming across, they oftentimes use these blanket terms, and we use LDL and other forms of LDL, like we use it interchangeably, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But let's move on from this slide. We're going to go over this quick because we already talked about the size of LDL, but I want you guys to know what's going on here. I want you guys to know what's going on here. So let me pull out my handy dandy trusty whiteboard, and let's talk about what in the world is going on here. Let's talk about what in the world is going on here. So don't get distracted by the numbers, all this stuff. We are talking strictly scale, right? So when we eat fat, we develop what we call a chylomicron. That is basically what I talked about, right? We talked about when we eat fat, we know that fat and water don't mix, so we need a vehicle to get it around. A chylomicron is in charge of getting that done. A chylomicron, eventually it finds its way into the liver. When the liver wants to make vehicles, lipoproteins, that it wants to send out and deliver all these fat to different places, it makes what we call a VLDL particle. VLDL, if LDL stands for low density lipoprotein, take a wild guess what VLDL stands for. 3, 2, 1, very low density lipoprotein, right? What? If it's a very low density, why is it bigger? Well, that's a density question, and that's just how density works, right? It depends on the concentration of protein, which we know protein is more dense than fat. So we're not going to talk about the actual terminology. That's not what we're here for, right? We're not in school, right? We just want to know the function. That's what matters most. That's what matters most. So when we're looking at this here, we have this VLDL. And as we could imagine, when the liver makes fat, this is the course it makes. I'm trying to draw a decent arrow. Hello, drawing skills. That's about as good as it's gonna get. When the liver makes an LDL particle, right? What is its job? Well, it makes this LDL particle so that it can deliver fat throughout the body. So think about this. There's a signal or something that is calling for some fat over in my, I don't know, left leg, right? So the liver wants to send fat over there. What is it going to do? Well, it's going to it's going to develop a VLDL. So that is the lipoprotein vehicle. This starts off big. And what it's going to do is actually, instead of just going straight to the leg, it's going to go and hit every signal that it could pass to deliver some fat. So on its way down, it's probably going to stop somewhere and give off a little fat. It's going to continue going through the blood. It's going to give off a little bit more fat. It's going to keep traveling throughout the blood. It's going to give off a little bit more fat. And as you could imagine, this VLDL, this lipoprotein vehicle, starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller as it starts to give out fat at these different locations. It's much like if you took a water balloon and you filled it up to the brim, right? And then you held the lip of it and you just let out a little bit of water and you see it get smaller. You let out a little bit more water and it gets a little smaller. And you let out a little bit more water and it gets smaller and smaller. Well, that is just how the LDL particles work. This is important because we have to know the difference between a VLDL and look at this, look at this. Look how little this gets. Look at number 7. Look how little this gets. So here's our VLDL. These arrows are rough. And here is our smallest version of LDL. Again, we're not worried about HDL. We're not worried about the numbers or anything. We're just looking at it, how little this particle is. Holy moly. This particle is so little. I heard a doctor describe it this way. Oh, what was that? I heard a doctor describe it this way. If VLDLs, or no, I heard a doctor describe it this way. Or no, I think if this number 7 here is about pea size, right? Then a VLDL is about a golf ball, and a chylomicron is about a basketball. Something like that. It's something like that. I can't remember his exact quote, but we are talking about huge differences in size, right? And this barely does it even any justice. But just imagine how little these are. And if you guys were here earlier, I talked about the size relevance in terms of when they are actually in a cell. So when there are when the LDL interacts with the cell, we're actually talking about this really tiny particle, just like a human standing in a Olympic stadium. That is an LDL particle in a cell. That's how crazy small these things are. Effects of phytosterols on LDL. Invix is in the right area. He knows where we're going. That's an important part. That's an important factor. That's an important factor. You're onto something, Invix. So check it out, guys. Check this out. So if we have this here, this initial VLDL. Uh-oh, is it going to work for me? Work for me. Whiteboard, where you at? If we have this initial LDL, this VLDL, which again, we don't need to worry about the names of this stuff. We just need to understand the principle. It starts off big once it leaves the liver, and it turns small as it travels throughout the blood. Now, this is not something that takes place over a couple seconds. This isn't something that takes place over a couple minutes. This process, right? This takes days. This is taking hours up to multiple days, right? Our lipoproteins, they're in the blood all the time. They're in the blood right now as we speak. If we didn't have them in the blood, nobody would be watching the stream, and I wouldn't be streaming. We would be laid out somewhere asking for help. We be out. What's up, Nick? What's up, my guy? We need lipoproteins. You're going to want to rewind this, brother. You're going to want to see this, Nick. This is basically a little bit more into the LDL stuff that I was talking about. But even still, we're still kind of early, I think. So you'll still get a lot of good value from this. But this is the principle that we have to understand is that without VLDLs, we don't even have LDLs. And we're going to return to what that means in a little bit here. Initial and terminal are no lab coat required names. Nobody calls an LDL initial. Nobody calls an LDL terminal. But I'm teaching the principle here. This is LDL 101. This takes days for this initial fat, not all that dense fat glob of a fat of lipids for this thing to get smaller. So, what is the difference between these two? This is where our ears perk up. This is where we pay attention. This is the most valuable concept in the conversation of LDLs, cholesterol. This is what determines our risk. This is so significant that there are so many papers written about just the significance of having a LDL particle. And I have this asterisk here because it's called LDL, but I'm going to get into this. It's really an umbrella term, right? You can go into research and some call it SD-LDL, which stands for small dense, low density lipoprotein, right? That's repetitive. Some papers call it LDLP, which stands for LDL particle, right? There are different names for this stuff, but just think the smallest version of LDL, just like that scale we just looked at, right? There's that terminal small LDL particle. Why are these so different from each other? What makes a big LDL particle different from a small one? Well, we have to understand that there's nothing inherently wrong with either. But what's interesting about this very small one is the research behind it. This is some of the research. Again, you guys can check out the description And the description has a bunch of information. Basically, I have my personal notes in there, and then I have the things that I'm actually citing. But if you just want to hear it from the horse's mouth, here I am. This is the difference between that regular initial LDL, or a particle that first comes out of the liver when it synthesizes a lipoprotein, compared to that terminal one. So let me draw them again so we can have that reference. But look at the difference here. Look at how big of a deal this is. Are you kidding me? Look at this. So we have this, we have this big old LDL particle that comes from the liver, and then we have this very small LDL particle, right? And I'm using LDL as a umbrella term. Nobody's mixing up. Oh, it's another thing. Actually, VLDL is also called triglycerides. So sometimes you hear, oh, I have a lot of triglycerides in my blood. My doctor say my triglycerides are up. We're talking about lipoproteins the entire time. Fat, that's the only way fat can get around. You don't have just fat flowing in your blood, right? So our doctors say that. Sometimes our research say that. But we're really talking about lipoproteins. That's why this is such an important topic to at least understand. We understand hemoglobin, and we understand like red blood cells. We understand platelets. We understand, I don't know, adipose tissue, fat cells. We understand, other different types of cells. But why don't we ever talk about lipoproteins when they are supposedly the things that are contributing to the largest disease, the most popular disease in the world? And cardiovascular disease, right? So let's talk about this. What word does you recognize, Jacob? Greater atherogenic potential. So what are we saying here? We're talking about the difference between a very big LDL and a very small LDL, right? Our smaller LDL particles actually have a greater atherogenic potential. How so? Well, they spend a longer time in the blood, right? When that initial LDL particle comes out from the liver and it starts doing its job, it's going to get small relatively quickly compared to that LDL particle, that terminal LDL particle, that very small one. Here's the problem with the small, dense LDL particles. They tend to linger in the blood longer than those big ones. The problem with this is that when you linger in the blood, as you can see here, you are actually more susceptible to metabolic processes. You are more susceptible to, I should say this word, metabolic modifications. You guys remember what we talked about there? The difference between LDL and modified LDL? This is what I was talking about, right? We can't have this cascade of things take place until LDL becomes modified. So we don't see these steps until LDL becomes modified. But for LDL to become modified, it has to spend a significant time in the blood, usually. And that's only really coming from these small, dense LDL particles. Now, what are you talking about, Johnny? How do I know you're not just making all this stuff up? You guys can see in the bottom right corner, 4 separate papers that talk about just the general pathology, the general difference between a big LDL particle and a small LDL particle, right? Now, with that longer circulation time, it makes them more susceptible to becoming modified. Not only that, but there are specific modifications that take place. Again, we're not going into the difference, the specific modifications in this. Oh, Jacob, you recognize triglyceride. We're not going to go into specific modifications in this stream, but we will talk about that later as it is relevant. But with this, we have to understand that one of the modifications that can take place specifically can be specifically defended against with an antioxidant, right? And not only are these small lipoproteins, these small LDLs, spending more time in the blood, making them more susceptible, but they are also less impervious to oxidation, right? That is to say that if the big old LDL particle has a sword and a shield and it's going out to battle, then this very small LDL particle is going out butt naked. Ain't gonna last long, right? That's what antioxidants do. They just defend us from certain things, namely oxidation. But again, don't want to go deep into that just yet, just to give it a name, right? So that is the difference here. This distinction between these two particles is so relevant and so important that we're talking about the difference between an increased risk of cardiovascular disease or not. And turns out we can modulate this. We can modulate this. More on that later. But let's keep going. You remember I talked about those steps, how there's that endothelial damage. Well, it happens because the LDL becomes modified. Yes, I'm hammering that over the head, but it's important to understand the difference here. That modified LDL, that modified form, if you look at that if you look at this one here, so I can follow along. If you're looking at this one here, this modified form, it's pro-inflammatory. We talked about some of those pro-inflammatory responses. We talked about that macrophage coming out. We talked about that endothelial compromisation, right? And we talked about those platelets, right? It gets nasty, it gets sticky, it gets ugly and slimy. That's what plaque formation is, but it's all coming from these small LDL particles. But also intuitively, a small size, just like when you're playing hide and seek and the small person is hiding like underneath the couch. Like, how'd you even get there? You're so tiny. LDL particles can go wherever they want, right? They are that small that they can go ahead and go in those compromised endothelial layers, right? So they're getting right underneath that compromised barrier that is literally touching our blood. That causes that plaque formation. Over time, this builds, blocks the artery, and now our artery is going to compensate as best as it can, but that thing could, come off, it become an embolism, it could travel, cause a stroke, cause a heart attack, right? So this is the formation that we're talking about, right? It all happens from this smaller LDL particle. I wish someone would have told me about this when I first started to figure out what the heck cardiovascular disease actually is. I think this is one of the things that you guys are going to want to return to. I don't think this is going to teach you everything you need to know about cardiovascular disease, but I think this is going to be something that you return to cross-reference your notes, cross-reference your understanding. And with this, and along with the supplemental material that I actually have in the description of this stream right now, I want you to catch those videos after this. A lot of things are going to start to click for you. A lot of things are going to start to click for you. An idea to improve the presentation for people who want to read the Cites QR codes. If watching on desktop, scan with handset to read. That is a really good. That is a really good. That is a really good suggestion. Thank you. I'll definitely consider that. I will definitely. Am I on your TV? Blue Freak. Am I on your TV? I'm on TV. Mom, I'm on TV. I'm on TV. All right. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Let's keep this thing going. I have no idea how long this stream's going to go for, but I'm hammering in these details because this is the stuff that we don't have time to talk about in the doctor's office. In fact, you guys are going to want to know this too. This is such a huge difference, right? VLDL, right? That big LDL particle and that smaller LDL particle that's well traveled. This is such a significant difference, right? We call that big LDL particle essentially benign. When we talk about cardiovascular disease and the formation of it, we are literally talking about it all started with the modification of specifically that small LDL particle. I would be so curious next time you guys go get blood work done. I'm so curious of your doctor's response if you were to ask them, does this test differentiate between big LDL and small LDL? If you really want to blow their socks off, ask them, does this test differentiate between VLDL and SDLDL, right? Not only will that tell you how hip to research your doctors are, because this is the thing about doctors. They don't have to do extra research, right? They can clock in, they can clock out. They do their job like everyone else. Well-studied, professional people. I'm not taking anything from them, but it's up to them if they want to do the extra research or not. Because this pathology here, this isn't something that they are guaranteed that they are taught, right? We can guarantee that they know pharmacology. We can guarantee that they know, right, drugs, essentially. We can guarantee a doctor is going to know what freaking warfarin is, right? We know that. But there's no guarantee that they studied this. They know what LDL is, probably, but probably not as far as the regular old common person does, right? Old Joe Schmo, that's bad cholesterol, right? Doctors may know just as much. It isn't until you spend time in the research and see the people actually doing the science that you start to understand these differences. So this is site number 2. Now, this is such, I wanted to let you guys know that this is not coming out of like nowhere, right? So this is the research you could check. Site number 2 I thought was fairly insightful in the description, and let's just read it off here. The development and progression of atherosclerosis are dependent not only and not so much on the amount as on the specific properties of circulating lipoproteins, right? So that means that it's not just when we get our lipid profile, they say we have this much cholesterol. Okay, it matters. But I would ask, what would matter more? Or is that even the full picture? I have this much cholesterol, but okay, how much of that cholesterol is actually problematic? And we can study this, but what you're going to see really soon here is that these things are actually not standardized. It's tough. It's really hard to differentiate between these two. We talked about how tiny they are in the blood, and we don't really always have the tools to routinely and cheaply do this in a routine in a clinical setting, right? We don't. That's just the reality of it. Well, let's keep going here because this is when things get interesting, where we talk about the risk. So we spent a lot of time talking about LDL, but I really spent that time because I want us to differentiate between cholesterol and LDL. Not only that, but understand how LDL makes its difference, right? As it goes throughout the blood. So this is the site for number 1. This is that paper. I actually have this physically with me too. Oh, this is a napkin. Why do I have a napkin right there? Just one napkin. It's like I don't even have the roll. Just one napkin. What did I get that for? And we have this. So this is the actual paper that we're going over. I had this in the video as a prop, and as you can see, this is what we're going over, right? This is the thing that makes the 4 claims, right? This is what's important here. Yeah. Let's keep this thing rolling. This is so interesting to me. This is so fascinating to me. Okay. So back to number 1, 23%. There's something very interesting going on when we talk about the type of fat that we intake and our risk of developing cardiovascular disease. And it's pointed out here. Mind you, everything in this study that I just showed you guys, that really this entire couple streams is going to revolve around, is hinging on defending soybean oil, right? So we're going through it, bit by bit, but we're breaking down the concepts and we're really looking at the big picture. So what they're saying is lowering LDL-C, which we know as LDL cholesterol, right? LDL-C. So this is interesting. This is interesting because we talked about the naming of things. What are they talking about? Are they talking about those small, dense LDL particles that spend more time in the blood and can be modified more easily? Or are they talking about the cholesterol that are embedded on LDL? Are they talking about the cholesterol that's inside of the vehicle? We don't really know. We don't really know. But they have to say LDL-C. They have to be a little bit more broad, and I'm going to tell you why. Lowering LDL-C, including from non-pharmacologic interventions, lowers CVD risk by 23%. By 23%. So, fun fact, there are a whole lot of studies like this, and they are all observational. We're going to talk about that a little bit more here. That's not a bad thing. We need observation studies, right? But there's a whole lot of studies like this. But what's interesting, and it's actually cited in one of my personal note studies, sorry that I don't have that listed, but this risk is never higher than 30%. It's never higher than 30%, interestingly. It can get up to 23, right? We see 23 here. Sometimes you might see 25, 26, 27, whatever, but it's never higher than 30%. I wonder why. Genuinely, I don't know. I wonder why. But it's just an interesting thing. But there is a lot of nuance that has to be discussed here. My favorite word, nuance. How weird would it be if I tattooed nuance somewhere? I don't have any tattoos. I had a tattoo phase, and I was like drawing in my notebook the tattoos I was going to get. But then I guess I just grew out of it, unfortunately. So I'm not yadded, as they would say around here. I'm not yadded. I'm not tatted up. I'm not yadded. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Bob D. That is per mole reduction. So it'd be 50 or. Oh, great question. No, what they're saying is that it corresponds. So with the population that they took, so let me talk about the study just a little bit here. With the population that they took, um, this is the study here. So we're actually looking at the study. So this is going to answer your question, Bob D. So what they found was when using statins, or let's start it over at the top. This is an observational study. Observational studies are really good for taking a really broad stroke bird's eye view. It's really awesome for that. The downside, as some of us know, is that we can't get granular and we really can't talk about the details. That's what this stream is here for today. We're going to be talking about the details. So with this broad stroke study here, this observational study, which parallels a bunch of other studies, and there's a lot of studies that agree with this, and I'm going to tell us why in a little bit here. But what they found is that there's a decrease in LDL by statins and other interventions resulted in a corresponding 23% risk reduction of CVD. Now, those that know me well know that I am not a math person, but I do know how to interpret studies to a fairly decent degree. What we're talking about here is that basically with the use of statins and the use of other non-pharmacologic interventions, basically a bunch of other stuff that is used to inhibit the production of cholesterol or bring our LDL levels down somehow, right? They measured a whole bunch of stuff that is detailed in the study below. What they found was a corresponding decrease in risk reduction. That is to say that it wasn't only statins that do the job. We always knew that statins work to lower our LDL, and I'll tell us why specifically. It's because the amount of LDL is dependent upon the amount of LDL the liver makes is dependent upon largely the cholesterol that's already circulating and or is in the cells. So what that means is that statins, they actually inhibit a very specific enzyme in the body. I'm going to get really technical here, but allow this word to go in your head and out immediately. You don't need to remember this. HMG-CoA reductase, just for the nerds. This is a very specific enzyme that is the rate limiting enzyme that essentially means we're going to make more cholesterol in this cell or we're going to make less cholesterol in this cell. So this is important. Why? Because cholesterol can be eaten, but it can also be made endogenously. It can be made endogenously. And what statins are doing is they're coming at your ability to make cholesterol, your body's ability to make cholesterol, right? But again, we talked about this. Is cholesterol a problem? That's the golden question we're talking about here. I think it plays a role in this, as do all the pieces of fat, but it's going to take me two streams to break this down. It isn't that linear, right? So we're talking about this corresponding 23% risk of reduction in cardiovascular disease. Now, this is a relative risk, and we won't see this above 30%. So what are we saying? Let's say there's an absolute risk, right? Let's say there's an absolute risk for everybody, right? We all have a risk of something, right? We all have a risk of breaking a bone sometime in our life, right? But we can actually isolate the population of skateboarders, and we can see that they will likely have an increased risk. So that's what we're doing here. We're just isolating a population. And this study took over 300,000 people. It took over 300,000 people. And I guess the question we want to ask is, what can we interpret? So if this study and similar studies, we never really see anything over 30%. Let's max it out. Let's say that the very, very base risk, absolute risk for everybody without isolating populations is 6% for developing cardiovascular disease, right? Let's say that with 6%, or with the 23% increase of 6%, so we take 6 times 1.23 and we get 7.38%. So this is the downside of observational studies. And let me just type it out so you guys can see it here too. This is the downside of our observational studies. We often interpret them. I wasn't going to spend time talking about this today, but I guess it's relevant. We often interpret them and make it seem like it's a bigger deal than they actually are. It's a bigger deal than they actually are. So, oh, I'm sorry. I was saying increased risk. I'm sorry. I meant risk reduction. Sorry. I did the opposite way. My bad, y'all. If we have a 6% absolute risk, I'm happy I caught that. And 23, what is that? 77. So we would take 6 and we'll multiply that times 0.77. So our 6% risk will go down to 4.6% risk. Check my math, y'all. Am I right? Yes, you're right on, Hector. You got it. We talked a little bit about that earlier in the stream. Check my math, y'all. Throw in your calculator. 6 times 0.77. Help. You guys have no idea. Anytime I do math, shout out my high school math teacher. Anytime I do math on this stream or for this channel in general, I actually call my math teacher. I need you to double check this because I am prone to making mathematical mistakes. That has never been my thing. I can do math, but it takes me a very long time. On paper, like I am an inefficient learner. I get there, but I'm just so slow. And numbers, I feel like are a whole different language. So, all right, let me write this out just really quick because this is the downside of using. This is the downside of using. This is the downside of using. Yes, 6.6 times 0.77. Yes, this is the downside. So if the absolute risk of developing cardiovascular disease is 6%, after we take a statin or we use any other intervention that is mentioned in this study, we will have a decreased risk that will drop down to about 4.6%, right? So we can actually look at that here. Boom, shaka, laka. You guys can see that. Boom, shaka, laka. So this is to say that if you were walking around with a 6% risk of developing cardiovascular disease and then you took a statin, you would have a drop, right? So this is a 23% difference. However, we are applying the absolute risk to the matter, and then we see that our absolute risk, it barely budges, but it budges, so it's significant. Now, I was going to spend time talking about that, but I do think it is something to note when we talk about observational studies. Now, the reason that this is important and the reason that this is sweet is because observational studies are necessary. We need them. So this takes this bird's eye view of over 300,000 people. Holy moly, what can we interpret from this? So we talked about there's this non-standardization between LDL particles, what they are named, oftentimes how they're measured, and even how they're extracted from the blood. So get this. We're looking at this same article here. Sorry for this next slide. It's a little bit loaded. It's a little bit loaded, but I want us to take away just what's highlighted here for now. We're still talking about that number 3 study that's above. Don't get confused by this. We're just going to read that second one in the middle there. Number 2, lack of standardization in LDL fractionation methods and varying clinical characteristics hinder the objective comparison of the results of clinical studies. What? What am I reading? So what do we mean by fractionation? We're essentially saying that there should be cutoffs and traditional, or I should say standard thresholds and cutoffs for measuring and classifying these different LDL particles. But because there aren't, we see a whole lot of variety. So check this out. There are no standardized measurements for classifying LDL particles, right? So that means that, or let me read them all first. There's no standardized methods for extracting LDL particles, and there's no standardized language for naming LDL particles. This is why this conversation is really hard to have, not only with our doctors, but with anybody who's willing to have it. Is because we can't even really talk about one thing and think that everybody in the room is assuming we're still talking about, they were talking about the same thing, right? Everything doesn't equate how we think it would in any other subject. That's why the topic of fat is so tough. Some say you can interchange lipid with fat, some say you can't. LDL often means SDLDL, and it also means LDLP. And then we also have VLDL, which also means triglycerides for some reason. So the language is all over the place. But then not only that, if you were to get your blood drawn right now at a hospital, they would send that off to a lab and your lipid profile will come back. If they take that same blood drawing, send it to a different lab, you would likely get different results. You would likely get different results. Not only that, but we don't even oftentimes, those tests don't oftentimes discriminate between what types of LDL. And as we see, the types of LDL we have are extremely important. That's why I was very curious what your doctor would say if you asked them, hey, does this test I'm about to take differentiate between small and big LDL? Right? It's a very necessary differentiation. You can look through all the research, and in my personal notes, if you really want to do the digging, it is known that there is no standardization in any clinical setting other than the equations we use to estimate the actual number. That means that the method, the actual way that we measure the LDL or the VLDL or the cholesterol itself, it's all different, right? And if it's all different, in the clinical setting, why wouldn't it be all different in the research setting. So this study, this observational study, what's cool about this is it's called a meta-analysis. What does that mean? That just means that this study looked at a bunch of other studies. But if there's non-standardization across the board in the industry, why wouldn't that take place in the actual research? And guess what? It certainly did. That is to say that every researcher did not measure all the lipid profiles the same exact way. Not only that, but they did not classify them all the same. So we can get results like this, but we have to interpret them lightly with a grain of salt, if you will, because we cannot say that everything is equal, right? What one author means by LDL, another author means as an umbrella term encompassing all of the LDL particles, when we know there are a bunch of different ones. Okay, I hope that made sense. That does not disqualify or discredit observational studies. It does not discredit this observational study cited by the original study we're going over. It's just understanding that, oh, we see this decreased risk, but how relevant is that in the grand scheme of things? Vocab heads up. Blue Freak says systematic and systemic are two different words. I hope I didn't say either one of those. I hope I said semantics, didn't I? Or are you just giving us a tip? Yeah, that's good, Blue Freak. So he says, for science, there's surprisingly a lack of standards. I watched something about microplastics, which basically said the same thing: no standards for any research. The most standardized thing with research is probably peer review. Outside of that, when it comes to the methodology, we have basically traditions and we have things that are popular in use, especially for specific use cases. But there are no like on paper, this is how we do this, right? When it comes to science, and this is kind of a good thing because it allows scientists to explore and stuff like that. But on the downside, it's really hard to compile studies like this, call it a meta-analysis, and say that everything under the umbrella is the same. So what they're saying is LDL-C drops. What they're saying is cholesterol drops, right? But all the studies used, I guarantee 100%, right? 100%. Or I can say, I could put it this way, at least theoretically, at most definitely, are not talking about the same thing, right? That's what we're going for here. All right, let's keep this train chugging, shall we? It's Saturday. I hope you guys are feeling good. Anybody got some fun plans you want to share in the chat? When chat moves like slow, what do we got? We got 91 people in here. When chat moves slow, it's either you guys are paying really close attention, you are completely lost, or you're multitasking. It's one of the three. It's one of the three. It's one of the three. So what are you right now? Are you paying really close attention? Are you totally lost? You have no idea what's going on? Or are you just multitasking? Or are you just vibing out? You just watching, listening? I'm very curious. Oh, you said just for fun. Yeah, I got you, Boo Freak. Landon keeping it honest. I'm multitasking. I'm also lost, but I'm here. Dennis is locked in. What's up, Dennis? Naomi's just here for the vibes. Thanks, Naomi. Awesome. Oh, I got you, Bob D. Oh, what's up, Lady D? Oh, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, definitely, definitely. The human brain is great at multiplexing tasks, but terrible at performing its best for all multiplexed tasks. Yeah. Wow. That is that is very accurate. Huh, that is a very interesting. Yeah. I want to make a short about that all of a sudden. I'm going to steal that idea from you. Hope you don't patent that. All right. Let's keep things rolling. So, number 7 in the now, don't expect the I got those numbers there just to cite, right? But these studies aren't going in order. So this whole thing, I think I want to read. I think this is the whole thing. One of the ones that I want to read the whole thing. Let me see. No. Okay. No. I just wanted to make this point known. Okay, got it. Okay, so lipoprotein particles are heterogeneous in size, density, charge, core lipid composition, specific apolipoproteins, and function. Oh my gosh, way too many vocab words, way too much jargon. What are we saying? All we're saying is that we use this term, it's called heterogeneity. This is essentially referring to the varying differences between us humans, right? So when we talk about these LDL particle size, what's interesting is the heterogeneity is so vast, right? The differences is so vast that from one person, we could talk about an LDL particle with twofold the cholesterol of another. So when we talk about these studies and these research articles or even our lipid profiles that extract the LDL count, it's like who even knows if they're talking about the cholesterol that's on there, right? Because the difference between one LDL particle to the next, there could be a twofold difference, right? Between one individual and another, and it's like, how do we specify this stuff, right? How do we specify this stuff? So that is just to say that there is a great difference of everybody's LDL particles. So the question that we want to ask and really focus in on here is the, I guess, the subject of the things that are inherently good, the things that are inherently bad. So we talked a whole lot about cholesterol. We talked a whole lot about lipoproteins. And what I want us to understand is that we have to ask, is cholesterol inherently bad? We talked about the three things it's important for. Are lipoproteins inherently bad? We talked about its job with delivering fat, right? LDL stands for lipid delivery lady, right? We talked about these things. And we're asking, are these things inherently bad? And we all know the answer to this question. The answer is no. There is never, there is nothing or close to nothing, right? There is close to nothing or nothing in the body that is inherently bad, that it makes and is automatically bad for us off the bat, right? If our body synthesizes both lipoproteins and cholesterol, why would these things be bad off the rip? Like, we're just not giving them a chance at all. You hear cholesterol, you're like, ah, right? So, of course, now we're talking about, are we talking about the amounts or are we just throwing the whole conversation away? Well, there's a little more nuance here. Of course, amounts matter, right? The amount that we synthesize, it matters. The amount that we intake, it matters. It has an influence, but how much of that has an influence on coronary heart disease risk is questionable. It's questionable. It's something to really look into. Reason being, I would ask this question. If we know LDL, lipoprotein, to be this benign, necessary, vital piece of human metabolism that the liver makes, and it does its job until it becomes modified, it's completely harmless. So I would ask the question, should we worry about how many LDL particles we're making? Or should we worry about preventing the modification of these LDL particles, right? If you give it any thought, I mean, it jumps out at you, honestly. You don't have to think about it too long. I'm looking at the latter. How can we prevent ourselves from modifying the LDL that we have? If we know that cascade of steps that lead to cardiovascular disease comes from the modified LDL, right? I keep saying that because I want us to walk away from the stream knowing that there is a difference. There is a difference. It must be distinguished between. There is a difference between regular LDL, benign, harmless, and modified LDL. You do not get cardiovascular disease without first modifying LDL. Tattoo it on your arm. All right. That is the bottom line here. That is the bottom line here. So, Johnny, you keep saying that we can modify LDL, but you haven't talked about, like, what we could do to prevent it becoming modified. We're going to get there, but I'll say this. Everything we do, for the most part, to some degree, is going to have an impact. So the amount of sleep that we have has an impact. Exercising, I'm sure, has an impact. I haven't looked much into that just yet. But when I was doing research on fasting, interestingly, we talked about that difference, right? My niece is in the next room crying. You probably hear her. We talked about that difference between the initial and the terminal. We talked about that difference between the big LDL and the small LDL. Interestingly, when you go on a reasonably long fast, I should say just intermittent fasting, I should say, it turns out your lipid profile comes back with larger
LDL particles. So what is that? What does that mean? We're not going to talk about that just yet. But it just means that yes, we can modulate these two things. Yes, we can make a difference in our LDL particles by our lifestyle. Yes, we can. Yes, we absolutely can. And it has nothing to do with how much cholesterol we eat, right? That's what we're getting at here. So finally, part one is over. Part two, and then we'll say our pieces out. Part two, and then we'll say our pieces out. Soybean oil lowers cholesterol. Part two is very shorter. It's a lot shorter than part one. But we had to spend that time talking because we need all this stuff to pay off at the end. You really can't talk about seed oils and soybean oils, right? We're going to interchange them. We can't talk about those two without understanding the big picture. So, soybean oil lowers circulating cholesterol levels and coronary heart disease risk. And blah, 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 blah. The 4 claims. We're looking at this second one here. Can I highlight it? Will it let me? Probably not because our thing's not activated. But you guys see that second claim there. Soybean oil lowers cholesterol. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So why do we, this article is talking about soybean oil, but it is important to understand that soybean oil is basically the same thing as a bunch of other seed oils that are on the market. So when we say soybean oil, we're also talking about peanut oil. We're also talking about, let's say, palm oil to a certain degree. There's different types. We're also talking about canola oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. These are all oils that take at least 5 steps, usually up to 7, to be made. And these are the oils that are in everything, right? Haphazardly put in all of our packaged foods and all of our restaurant foods, rather fast or slow or sit down, right? There's a movement now, it's called seed oil free, that restaurants are trying to get hip to because seed oils are ubiquitous in our society. They're everywhere. So there are restaurants taking a stance and saying, hey, we don't have these. Come eat with us. We use beef tallow. We use butter. We use olive oil, right? So we have that going on now because of the seed oils. So when we talk about these, the study talks about soybean oil, but really we're talking about all seed oils here. What happens when we eat seed oil? Is it true that our LDL cholesterol actually drops? The answer is yes. Undeniably, when we consume seed oils across the board, you're going to be hard pressed to find research that does not confirm the fact that our LDL cholesterol levels drop. They certainly do. And there is quite the fascinating yet intuitive mechanism behind that fact. So you may have heard, and this study actually cites it itself. I don't think I had the screenshot, but the study that we were talking about, the point of all the point of the stream in the first place, right? That study cites that it cites a bunch of studies that says and confirms that the replacement of saturated fatty acids with polyunsaturated fatty acids actually reduces the amount of LDL cholesterol that is made. Really, we can scratch the word cholesterol. What's really taking place is this reduction in LDL particles, LDL vehicles, right? Why? Why is that taking place? Well, let's talk about it. There's something very interesting going on here. And I'm curious if anybody already knows. But why does seed oil lower our cholesterol levels? Why does it lower our saturated fat levels? No, sorry, not saturated fat. What I'm saying, our LDL levels. So let's talk about it. First, there is no mechanism that exists that can possibly influence the amount of LDL that we make dependent upon the type of fat that we eat. Let me reword that. Regardless of if you eat monounsaturated fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids, or saturated fatty acids, none of those, right? We're talking about the literal molecular makeup. None of those can determine how many or the amount of LDL that our liver synthesizes. Why? Because that just doesn't exist. right? That's like saying I'm about to go play baseball. I can't wait to get so many touchdowns, right? It's just, we're talking about two different planes. So regardless of what communicator tries to tell you that, eating saturated fat increases your LDL levels, I would step back, because the type of fat that we eat, it has an influence, but not on the amount. Don't do that. Don't do that. And there's a difference. There's a difference. So when you hear health communicator, or any communicator for that matter, say that there's a difference. There's a difference. So what is the difference? Let's talk about it. Where does LDL come from? Well, there are two sources. Here's two vocab words to impress your doctor: exogenous, endogenous. Exogenous just means extrinsic or external, outside source. Endogenous means homemade, made by the body. Exogenous sources: meat, eggs, they have cholesterol. Why? Well, think about it. We have cells. Our cells need cholesterol for their cell membranes and other things. And the animals that we eat, well, they have cells too, I would like to think. Oh, it turns out they need cholesterol too. They need that vital piece of human metabolism as well. So, of course, when we break the animal meat down, then there's cholesterol there. That makes sense, because they needed that for their cells too. Interestingly, plants have cholesterol as well, but it isn't the cholesterol that we have. It mocks cholesterol that we have. It's essentially the equivalent for cholesterol, and it's for plants. Funny enough, it works the same way. Our cholesterol for our cell membranes, guess what? There are these things called phytosterols that act just like cholesterol, respective for the plant. So these phytosterols, they are actually in the cell walls of those plants, and they do the same thing that our cholesterol does. Fascinating. Fascinating. So we talked about what cholesterol is used for, but I'll give us a rehash real quick. Bile, steroid hormones, and the production of in our cell membranes. Those are the three reasons. So that's why we need cholesterol, right? That's why we need cholesterol. Now, we talked about phytosterols. Let's take a guess. Which one is cholesterol? Which one is cholesterol? Which one is cholesterol? Let's play a game of what does cholesterol look like molecularly? Which one? Let me give you guys a second. What is your guess? Say left or right. Sorry, I didn't give you guys options to say. You probably left or right. What is cholesterol? The one on the left or the one on the right? You can be wrong. There's no reason. We love being wrong here. That's like the best place to be. As you guys come up with that answer, I'm going to describe why being wrong is so good. Being wrong is good because if you're always right, I guarantee you can't always be true. So if you think the answer is all the way over there, and it turns out, and if you think the answer is all the way over there, and somebody else thinks it's all the way over there, y'all both ain't right. It's somewhere in the middle. It's okay to be wrong. Not only is understanding this stuff important, but you don't get to that level until you not only ask, how could this be? But you also have to ask, how could this not be? That's what No Lab Code Required is about. Asking how can something be and how not can something be? Because the truth is often found. How is Blue Freak the only person that answered the question? What do you guys think it is? Are you guys going to sleep on me? Is it the left or is it the right? What? I was expecting at least 4 people to answer. Blue Freak is the only person that answered. Am I losing you guys? Am I losing? Do I need to come through your screen? Is it left or is it right? Landon says right. Blue Freak says left. Dennis says right. Naomi's back. She's like, right. That's my 4. I need a 5th now. Give me 6. Where are you guys? I'm lonely. Is it left or is it right? I won't tell you yet. I need one more answer and then I'll let it be known.
One more. Lady D said it's both. Ah! What are we doing? I need a proper answer. It's not a trick question. Lady D think I was tricking you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Melise, I hope you're saying your name right. She says left. All three, there's not even three. What is Hector talking about? All right. The answer is left. The answer is left. So the one on the left is cholesterol. The one on the left is cholesterol. The interesting thing is that a lot of times if you want to, see now my chat's tripping. We lost it. A lot of times if you want to understand physiology, walk around with this. If you want to impress a physiologist, tell them this. I know this about physiology, that shape determines function, right? Oftentimes when the body wants to get things done, it's really just a bunch of, when you get really micro, just a bunch of simple shapes going in simple things. It's one big puzzle piece, right? Cholesterol and phytosterol are so molecularly similar. I mean, they're almost one-to-one when we're looking at them here, is that they compete on the actual absorption site in human intestines. That is to say that when we are eating phytosterol, I'm going to tell you guys where it comes from, but it actually competes with cholesterol and it inhibits the absorption of cholesterol. This is an interesting mechanism. Pay attention here. It's going to get a little bit, going to make a word up here, pathologic. All right, I'll never say that word again. I'm so sorry. But phytosterols, right? If plants need their version of cholesterol, as we do, that's what phytosterol is. Guess where it comes from? Seed oils, vegetable oils, right? Butter has cholesterol. Soybean oil has phytosterols. They are looking like the same puzzle piece. They compete in human intestines. Phytosterols win out and cholesterols lose out. That is to say that when we are taking in that cholesterol, it isn't getting absorbed. And phytosterol actually inhibits the absorption of cholesterol. It's one big old stiff arm. Phytosterol is like, you ever been cut off in line? It's just like, you know, it's, what are, you know, I'm sorry, I don't even. So it's just like, it's a stiff arm. And we don't get cholesterol in the body when we are eating these phytosterol. So why does this matter? Because we talked about this, guys. We talked about this. The liver responds dependent upon the level of cholesterol we have in the body. That's how vital it is. The level of cholesterol we have in the body can actually influence our LDL count and things of that nature, right? And things of that nature. So the liver's response. If cholesterol promotes LDL creation, so let's talk about this. When we take cholesterol into the body, my chair is so squeaky. When we take cholesterol into the body, our liver actually synthesizes and produces more VLDL. Why? Well, we just took it into the body. It entered into a chylomicron, forget that word. It goes into the liver, and the liver says, all right, we got new cholesterol. Let's go ahead and deliver this out. So it makes this VLDL particle, right? That big LDL particle that has some cholesterol, has some triglycerides, it's going to get ready to send some stuff out. Now, if cholesterol intake promotes the production of VLDL particles or LDL particles, then a decrease in cholesterol intake will likely do the opposite, right? That is to say that if we are not taking in cholesterol, then we are not making those VLDL particles. We're not making those LDL particles. In fact, so much so that when we start to take in less and less cholesterol, our liver develops its receptors, which are, we're just going to imagine they're antennas, and it calls for all LDL in the blood, not all, but some LDL in the blood to come back to the liver to be recycled, right? That is to say that if we aren't bringing in new cholesterol, we're just going to use our old stuff. I was trying to find a decent example. You guys can see all the way at the bottom there. I said, think of example. I couldn't think of one other than when you use grease on the on stove and you reuse it, right? It's like instead of going to the store to buy some new grease, I'm just going to use this again, right? We just reuse the same, I don't know what, coconut oil, right? It's the same exact thing. The liver recycles. The liver recycles. If our LDL, if we're not bringing in new material, let's use the material we already have. So, does soybean oil and seed oils lower our cholesterol count? Yes. Yes, they do. One, because it's not getting absorbed. Not only does it inhibit our cholesterol account,
what did I just say? Not only does it inhibit our cholesterol count, but it also discourages the production of new LDL particles. Wow. Wow. 1 point up for soybean oil, right? 1 point up for seed oils, right? Ah, I, I don't know. I don't know. Does this vindicate seed oils? I don't know, John. You haven't said anything wrong with them yet. I don't know. Does this vindicate seed oils? So I hope that mechanism makes sense, guys. I hope that mechanism makes sense. So this is also what I want us to understand. The liver makes VLDL from scratch, right? And then it starts to travel through the blood, and it travels through the blood. It becomes smaller and smaller. Once it gets to a certain size, most of us, most researchers, most communicators, we're going to classify that as LDL. We cannot have, I repeat, we cannot have LDL without first having VLDL, right? VLDL, we know, is that big old LDL particle that first comes out of the liver, right? We can't have one without the other. So that is just a highlight. If we aren't making VLDL, guess what? We aren't forming LDL either. So that is the mechanism that takes place when we don't bring cholesterol into the body, specifically through what we're looking at here by the seed oil being blocking out that cholesterol, right? Right. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate the kind words. That is what that means there. That is what that means there. Okay, cool. I think I covered everything there. So, is soybean oil vindicated? Again, I told you guys part 2 would be a lot shorter. Is soybean oil vindicated? I mean, what are we doing the streams for? No, of course it's not. What are we talking about here? It's not vindicated because it decreases the amount of cholesterol that's in the body. We are still trying to figure out if cholesterol has anything to do with cardiovascular disease in the first place. And it turns out it's probably just an innocent bystander that's there at the scene of the crime, but that doesn't mean that it caused the crime. We already talked about what caused the crime. Modified LDL. And guys, this isn't coming out of, this isn't coming out of my, like, what do you call it? This isn't coming out of nowhere. I'm not making this stuff up. I have my personal notes in the description. I have my citations in the description for a reason. Your doctor and people you talk to about this subject matter, they just don't have time to go into the differences. But this is what the difference is. LDL is not the same. They do not perform the same action as modified LDL. So the question is, what does cholesterol have to do with that? Turns out, not much of anything, as it's just a passenger, but it has an influence on how much LDL is made, sure, but it's just a passenger in the LDL vehicle. It's just a passenger in the LDL vehicle. It's important and we need it, but it's just a passenger in the LDL vehicle. The question is, are we going to go ahead and keep worrying about how much LDL is in the body, or are we going to focus on preventing it from being modified? Now, I'm not going to say, I would be silly to say that the amount doesn't matter, because if you go into the research, you're going to see you're not going to see either or. You're going to see both and. And this is what I wanted to get at too. It's not strictly the amount of LDL that we have. It's simply the amount of LDL that we have and the amount of modified LDL that we have. It's just that simple, right? It's just that simple. We can't develop cardiovascular disease without modified LDL, period. And I know I keep throwing that word around, and we don't really know what that is yet, but that's what the other stream is going to be about when we go to parts 3 and 4. We're going to learn what the heck modified LDL is, where it comes from, and how we ourselves affect it, right? By what we do, what we eat, how modified LDL comes about, right? Right. So I think the practical takeaway from this stream right now is to ask your doctor for fun. If you want to do this, ask your doctor for fun. Does this lipid profile, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. I remember one time, I was still fairly newly health conscious. I was still trying to learn about the gut, and I was interested in the microbiome, and I was just like, whoa, fiber does this to the gut and all this stuff, and our gut lining is important, and zonulin. I was learning about gluten, all this stuff. I'm like, whoa, so fascinating. I was reading on it, and I learned that you can't like directly measure your gut. Now, technology is advancing, and there are these things called stool tests, right? So what's in our gut is pooped out, right? So we can get a solid example or a solid understanding of what's going on in our gut by looking at our poop, studying our poop. And at the time, I kind of knew of the test, but I didn't know of any other tests, right? So I asked my doctor when I was doing a checkup. I asked my doctor, I was like, hey, um, man, I've been looking at the gut lately. Are there any tests that can tell me more about the microbiome? My doctor looked at me like I was bleeding from every open hole in my body. She was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, what did I say? Right? And and she just said, no, no, there is not. And I'm being dramatic, but I'm not really. She was like, no, no, there isn't. And I was kind of like, I was confused because I was like, should my feelings be hurt? Is she calling me stupid or does she not know? And it hurt my feelings. I was like, no, what? It's like either she was surprised that I knew about that or she didn't know about it, kind of thing. And I haven't been to that doctor since, but um, yeah, yeah. What was I talking about? What was I talking about? So Hector, um, can I be a doctor? Uh, I was going to. Okay, so when I first graduated, it was like, no, I'm not going back to school. It's not happening. And I'm still not going back to school for medical school specifically. But there is another form of a doctor that I am headed to becoming, and this is a soft announcement. This has been the case for a little bit. I have yet to announce it to you guys, but perk up. This is the first announcement of next. What's next for No Lab Coat Required? I'm going to become a doctor, a PhD holder, that is. And I go to school in Virginia a year from about this time. So at about a year, I'm going to be taking my first couple courses, and I'm going to be learning even more. So yeah, your boy is going to be becoming a doctor. And there's a joke because PhD holders aren't typical doctors; they're not medical doctors. And there's this joke that goes, "Oh, you're going to become a doctor, but not the type that helps people." Now, I have held back on announcing this because um, I wanted to first make sure that I was doing it, and it is confirmed now. I will be becoming a doctor. Um, yeah, but second, I wanted to also communicate very clearly why, and I'll give you guys this softball right now. Why I'm becoming a doctor. There are just some things you cannot Google. I spend an enormous amount of time reading academic white paper, and the amount of connecting the dots that I have to do sometimes make my research process inefficient. And I realize with more prior knowledge and a deeper understanding of some of the more intuitive, like automatic processes of the body, so I'm talking about some really microscopic stuff, I think I'd be able to speed up that research process. Um, I'm going for the knowledge, man. I really, really, really want to learn more. You guys are in really good hands. I consider myself an unbiased person. Of course, we all have inherent bias, but I truly believe every subscriber of this channel, you guys are in really great hands. Like, I promise to do my due diligence to never fence myself in on one side of any subject, right? That's the whole reason I'm even doing this stream, right? Is because all of the everything that we talk about, it deserves to have the nuance explored, right? We can add insights to so many things, right? And I think for me and my next step in just expanding No Lab Coat Required, um, this is just the beginning. And I have to become a doctor, right? That's just like that's my next progression. And I realized I want to become that because I am deeply fascinated by learning. I was so opposed to extra school for so long. Like when I graduated, and No Lab Coat Required videos were already being made by the time I graduated, and I figured I'm just gonna work on this until it, becomes something that's awesome and can fund my life. And I'm never going back to school. Um, but as I, continue to make videos and I continue to look at the academic white paper and I just learned so much more, I realized that that mindset was limiting to myself. And I need to go and get some things taught professionally, essentially, or traditionally, right? It's really awesome to learn some of these mechanisms on your own. But I think there's certainly something to be said when you can be taught them kind of traditionally, right? So I'm really, really interested in learning more. Thank you guys so much for the congratulations. That's so nice. Yeah, thank you, Hector. So I also want to talk about this. This is also why I'm hesitant. He says we don't want to lose you to the dark side. In all seriousness, you have the mind and drive, brother. Proud of you, man. Yo, I really appreciate those words. Hey, JC, what's up, Jacoya? I really appreciate. Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate that, guys. This is another reason why I was hesitant because when you go to an institution to learn institutional stuff, you become institutionalized, right? So it's like I'm hesitant to call out the fact that I am going to school next year, right? And I'll tell you guys what the PhD is going to be in biomedical science. I first get a master's in that, and that's really just when I come back with that, I'm going to be on fire. Like that's really the information I'm looking for. But the next 2 years after that, it's going to be more research based and I'm going to learn more about the inner workings of research. And all in all, this is going to help me be a better communicator because I kid you not, this is violent sounding, but I bleed no lab coat required. And I was hesitant to talk about becoming a doctor because everybody's going to be like, oh, he's going to come back and become institutionalized. I solemnly promise to you, I am not interested in becoming, an old stale person that is, compensated by industries and not trying, fenced in on one side and they're just a product of the industry they're in. I will fight against that. I promise right now to the live 98 people we have here, I promise I will fight against that to the best of my ability until I am back from school, right? What does that mean for No Lab Coat Required? This was a soft announcement, but I'm just telling you guys the whole spiel. What does that mean for No Lab Coat Required and his YouTube channel? Absolutely nothing. This will take priority over, it's really weird to say, but it will take priority over my schooling. Both will get done, but No Lab Coat Required. I kid you not, I bleed this stuff. And I want to be the best version of myself that I can possibly be, right? That's what sums all that up. What's up, Rainy? What's up? Yeah. Thanks, Rat Computer. Thank you. So yeah, yeah, YouTube is so weird because I would say like spread the word, but like we're all watching on our little devices or whatever. So only like 100 of my subscribers know this right now. I told a very few amount of family members and stuff, and yeah, I'm going to be going to Liberty University in Virginia, 2025, and I'm studying biomedical science. Um, let's see, what else? The Oh, I had a thought. It just left me. But yeah, those are the details. Those are the details. Um, yeah. Some would say I should be institutionalized. All right, Kevin. I'm watching out for you. I'm watching out for you. Oh yeah, that's so fire, Blue Freak. That's the biggest takeaway here. Not that there's different cholesterol or the science behind that, but never losing the desire to learn and gain understanding. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, JC. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, that's awesome, Laura. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a private university, a little bit on a conservative side. I mean, it's probably the most on the conservative side of as a university could get. And fun fact, I went to Olivet Nazarene as a freshman for college. If anybody's familiar, it's a small private Christian school in Illinois, and I ran track for them, and that is a similar place to Liberty University, just a lot smaller. And I ended up transferring because I was dealing with culture shock. And interestingly, uh, I transferred out and I went to Western Illinois for some time, all that fun stuff. But I learned looking back that that was a very productive campus. That's one thing I took away. It's a positive place to be for, and it's kind of it has its people call it religious, and it's uh, it's Christian, it's conservative, all that stuff. So it's like, oh, you kind of associate it with a bunch of restrictions and all that stuff. And people call it lame because it's like, oh, you can't go party, you got to wear, you can't wear like certain clothes, all this other stuff. And it's like, yeah, they certainly have their rules. I mean, I went to one in my freshman year, I know that. But what I learned when I transferred out is that I didn't even transfer because of those rules. I transferred for other reasons, and I learned that I already obliged to all those rules. Like my bedtime, 8 p.m., brother. Everything turned off at 8 o'clock. I need to go to bed. Right. So it's like I learned from experience that those campuses are actually typically typically productive and positive. So I will be going back to one. Um, and yeah, I think that'll be fun. It's biased. Yeah, I mean, I could understand that take, but you're talking to somebody that's you know, it's let's just say I'm very hard to fence in. I question myself. Like it's hard to fence bias on me. Just personally thinking, I'm not impervious to bias. I'm not. But I try to stay extremely open minded. Let's just put it that way. So, um, not only that, but I guess I will say I'd rather be in Illinois studying. But honestly, there's no program out here. Like I'm not going to school for freaking for fun, right? Like there's very specific things I want to learn. And LU over there in Virginia actually have the actual class coursework that I'm most interested in with their biomedical science path. Okay. All right. Is soybean oil vindicated? You guys will have to return and see for the next stream. Guys, thank you so much. Let's get some purple hearts in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. This was fun. This was awesome. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Saturday. And I hope you guys learned. I hope you gained some insight. We will be back. Won't tell you when, because when content creators tell you when and they schedule stuff, they always lie and get it wrong. I will never fall victim to that. All right. Peace out, guys. Much love. Thank you guys so much for hanging. I know this was convoluted with a whole bunch of jargon and stuff, but I did my absolute best. I hope you guys gained some insight and some perspective out of this one. I'ma get about y'all way. Peace out, y'all. Peace out, peace out, peace out. Purple hearts. Next time, y'all. Next time. Peace.